Good evening and welcome to another edition of Assembly Update. My name is Scott Stringer and I represent the Upper West Side and Clinton communities in the New York State Assembly. Tonight's show is going to be about issues that many of us care passionately about, issues that are really on the cutting edge of public policy debate in Albany. We're going to be talking about issues really that affect women, but when we say affect women, it really affects children, families, and the fabric of New York City. And my guest this evening is Lois Canter Shapiro. She's the lobbyist for an organization many of us care about and work with, the National Organization for Women Now. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Scott. It's nice to be here with you.
Thank you for being here. Although I don't think Now needs a long introduction to the people who are watching tonight, but tell us a little bit about the organization.
Well, the National Organization for Women New York State, Scott, is a bipartisan organization which exists in the state of New York. It's a chapter of the national organization. We have 30,000 members statewide, and we cover issues of a wide spectrum, including healthcare issues, childcare, women work in poverty, reproductive rights, civil rights. If you name it, we cover it if it affects women and children in the state of New York.
And a lot of people think, when they think of Now, they think of historic and important demonstrations in Washington and in New York State and the kind of political organizing that Now is so well known for. But in reality, over the last few years, I've had an opportunity to work with Now through you as the lobbyist, having to do with legislative issues. And tell me a little bit about your role in that process.
Sure. Well, as you know, for the past 7 years, I've been the lobbyist for the National Organization for Women, and we've worked closely with a lot of different members on both sides of the aisle, particularly with your office, on issues everything affecting health care, and in particular, issues affecting breast cancer in the state of New York. At the present time, there's legislation which exists in New York State, sponsored by Assemblyman Engelbright, which would tackle this very important issue. As I'm sure you're very well aware, and as are the constituents in your district, breast cancer is at an alarming increase at this time. In fact, 1 in 8 women will get breast cancer during the course of their lifetime. So therefore, we strongly support a bill which has been introduced by Mr. Engelbright, which would establish a database to show whether or not there's a correlation between pesticides and breast cancer in the state of New York.
And that's the pesticide reporting bill.
That's correct. It's Assembly Bill 3755A, and of course we would urge the viewing audience to contact their legislators to urge the passage of this bill by the Senate. If I could just take a moment to tell you a little bit more about that bill.
In fact, I want you to, because while it seems that the Assembly bill, the Engelbright bill, is a bill that makes sense, it's certainly the right thing to do, but you've been on television, and I just saw you last week on television, and there's a whole controversial issue having to do with the Republicans in the Senate. So
thank you. Well, 2 weeks ago I was on Fox 5 down in New York City on Good Day New York, and we had just met 2 days earlier with all of the Long Island Republican senators who had told us that the Engelbright bill had no chance of passage in their House. We were alarmed at this information, and in particular, Senators Lack and Senator Skelos told us that the key components of that bill, the Engelbright bill, had no chance of being in the final version. We were given the impression very clearly that a weak pesticide breast cancer bill was forthcoming. Well, true to their word, 3 days later, this past Monday, there was a press conference that Senator Bruno had down on Long Island with Senator D'Amato. Unfortunately, and to our disappointment, a couple breast cancer activists on Long Island came on board with the Bruno bill. And the National Organization for Women looks at this Bruno bill as being a Trojan horse. It really, they have been successful at convincing some people that it has more than what it does have, but it has significant problems which alarm us.
Contrast for us the Assembly bill and the Senate bill so the audience understands that there are some major differences between a real bill and a bill that really would not go very far in helping women in the state.
I'd be glad to. The Engelbright bill establishes the requirement that commercial applicators, which are your lawn care companies, and private applicators, which are your farmers, report to the Department of Environmental Conservation of the pesticides that they use out in the world. they would be required to report on general use pesticides and restricted use pesticides. Now, keeping in mind that farmers are already required to keep records on restricted use pesticides, and many of them already keep records on general use pesticides because food producers require them to. This would be a comprehensive data collection bill which would allow then researchers to then for once and for all show the correlation between not only pesticides and breast cancer, but testicular cancer, prostate cancers, and all of the neurotoxic effects that it has, particularly of interest to children.
And all we're talking about in the Assembly bill is really a reporting requirement.
That's correct.
All this is reporting with no end necessarily, although hopefully when you see the correlation, other legislation could be introduced. But right now it's just reporting.
Exactly. And it would provide information to the public so that the public would be informed to show whether or not there are certain areas of the state where there's a high incidence of certain types of cancers, particularly breast cancer, and usage of certain pesticides. Now, if we take the Senate Bruno bill, which has just been introduced a week ago, it's totally different. There are so many loopholes in the bill as to make it almost not worth pursuing at this time. And of course, as you know, the National Organization for Women has come out vehemently opposed to their version. What this bill does is it requires farmers, particularly, to keep records of restricted use pesticides, which is already required by law. But it only requires the farmers to keep records of only one type of general use pesticides, and those are the probable carcinogenic pesticides, not the known carcinogenic pesticides, not the possible carcinogenic pesticides, and not all of the other pesticides which very clearly could in time be found to have health problems. Why is this a problem? Because we have to keep in mind that when the Environmental Protection Agency in Washington registers a pesticide, they're not giving any assurance that it's safe for the health. So there are a lot of pesticides out there that are now general use that are slowly being tested by EPA and will make their way into the restricted use category or being banned altogether.
But when I saw you, when at your press conference on Inside Albany, and I happened to watch that on a Sunday, it's incredible that this press conference, when we saw the press conference that the Motto did on Long Island is where the highest incidence of breast cancer is being discovered. When I started getting involved in the issue a number of years ago, a lot of Long Island legislators said, it's good that you're doing this, because in our districts in Long Island, the rate is so much higher, the danger is so greater, and there has to be a reason why it's so much higher in Long Island than opposed to other parts of the state.
That's very...
And that is amazing to me that they would take, or even attempt, a watered-down version of a bill that could really go to solving the problem.
Well, another part of the bill that deeply concerns us is that the Bruno bill establishes a politically controlled cancer science board who, at their own discretion, would be able to control the release of the information to the public. The public wouldn't ordinarily have the information obtained, and the information obtained would not be comprehensive. Keep that in mind. In addition to which, this politically controlled board would decide what type of information would be accessible to the researchers. Now, when you start interfering with scientific research with politics, that becomes very alarming to all of us. So, you know, one of the main issues that we have raised on behalf of the women and the children and the men of this state, and the families, of course, is Senator Bruno and are the Republican Long Island senators saying that saving farmers' paperwork is a higher priority than saving the lives of our families?
And if farmers' paperwork is a burden, then there are ways, financial and otherwise, to help the farmers comply. And government can certainly walk in and work with the farmers to expedite the paperwork and help them, because this is a major health issue. So there's nothing burdensome if government will come in and say, let's help out a little bit. This is something new. We're going to train you. We may even help finance part of it. And we'll let the reporting agencies come and guide you, because we're really looking for a solution or a correlation that could really save, tens of thousands of lives, over a long period of time.
That's exactly correct. And you're reminding me of another issue of the Bruno bill, which is also distressing, and that is the fact that there's a giveaway to the farmers. In common law, individual farmers are held strictly liable for the non-negligent release of hazardous chemicals in the groundwater, and Bruno's bill would eliminate that type of liability. That's very alarming to us now, because that type of provision does not belong in a database type of bill.
You and I were talking yesterday, which I guess is true with a lot of legislation. I guess we call it legislation of the moment. There seems always in Albany, and I guess even in the Congress, there's always a window of opportunity that comes on an issue. that when you're going to deal with pesticide reporting, you don't get two cracks at the apple. You pass a bill and you hope it works, but you really can't come back the next year on a watered down bill and then say we're going to make it better. Sometimes once you do pesticide reporting, the mindset is we've done that, and then you have to wait sometimes 5 or 10 years to analyze whether the bill worked and then come back. And you made the point that on issues like this, where it's really life and death, where there has to be real scientific research and real analysis of what's going on having to do with pesticides, correlation with breast cancer and other cancers in the state, that we may not get a second crack, that we really can't compromise on an Assembly Senate version, that we have to really be supportive, and people have to understand you don't get two bites at the apple on this.
You're raising an important issue, and of course it's making me think of yet some other things. It is of concern to us. This is not an issue where in Albany parlance we can accept half a loaf, because if the foundation for the database established is faulty or cracked, everything that comes afterward will not be adequate. Secondly, we've noticed that the Long Island Republican senators and the upstate Republican senators are on both bills. They're on the Engelbright bill and they're on the defective Bruno bill. So, which leads us to believe that they're sitting on the fence and they're going to wait to jump to one side or the other to claim to their voters in November that they supported a breast cancer bill. And third, I just want to basically say that, you know, when legislators do that, they create the impression that the legislators don't know what is in either bill. And really, you know, us activists out there do know what is in either bill, and I want to make it perfectly clear that the Bruno bill is not anywhere near a negotiated possibility at this time. And we're very saddened by the fact that they were able to convince, by this Trojan horse they've erected, to some of the breast cancer activists on Long Island that it is a good bill. It is not a good bill. And just as an additional note, for those in your viewing audience who are aware of this, the EPA in Washington is redoing their classification system. They classify pesticides by a letter system, A, B, C, D, and E. It's going to be obsolete by the time the Bruno bill becomes effective in the year 2002, which raises yet another issue. Why would it take Bruno 6 years to implement a partial program which is eventually going to be obsolete? Believe me, the National Organization for Women could get this program started in 6 months.
In 6 months.
And with every year of delay, we're delaying and shortening the lives of our citizens.
You know, a couple of weeks ago, I had Alice Yeager, who came to Albany. She's executive director of SHARE, which is a major breast cancer awareness group located in New York City and really throughout the state. It's an organization that started with a desk and a phone, and in the last few years has really grown, and I've had an opportunity to work with SHARE. And when you listen to Alice on this show and you hear the hope and the real sense that the legislative process can work for women with this terrible disease, if only legislators were sensitized, and part of their mission is to sensitize people and then to fight for legislation. I would have a hard time coming back to that group and saying that this was a total and complete failure, and now the issue is off the table. And that is what I think a lot of people in the audience have to recognize, that we can't allow this to be off the table. What is your strategy for bringing this into the mix again?
Well, we're having meetings during the course of this week. We're hoping that Senator Bruno will, in good conscience, sit down with us at the table to negotiate a realistic type of bill. We have a great deal further to go. He's made some baby steps in the right direction, but they're so tiny at this point as to make us have great concern. So we still have 95% of an effort to go on the way. To be right to the point, Scott, if the bill lacks some significant measures, the National Organization for Women will come out in strong opposition to the bill, as we've already have at this point in time. We're not going to play games with women's lives, children's lives, and men's lives. The stakes are too high. There's no room here for half a loaf.
And people should understand that they have an opportunity to make a difference here by calling
the National Organization for Women. You can reach our office here in the Albany area at area code 518-893-0346, or they can call your office and get the number from you.
And we'll show that later. In fact, we'll try to get the producer to put up the number. So before we leave, if you didn't catch now, the now number, we'll certainly get it to you. We're going to take a short break, and when we return, we'll talk with Lois Shapiro-Canter about other issues having to do with domestic violence, the legislative process, and where now stands on some of these important issues. So stay tuned.
Chemistry class led me to a life of crime. I catch murderers, rapists, and thieves with a microscope. Help your daughter become a scientist. Instead of a tea set, get her a chemistry set. Look at the boring job I got from being a science nerd. Expect the best from a girl. That's what you'll get.
For those of you who are just joining us, my name is Scott Stringer, and I'm a state assembly member representing the Upper West Side and parts of Clinton community. We've been talking this evening with the lobbyist for the National Organization for Women, Lois Shapiro-Canter, talking about legislative issues that impact women, but also impact families, children, and the welfare of the state. And Lois, moving away from the pesticide reporting bill just for a second, because I think you could talk about it for another 2 hours with a lot of passion. Now has also been concerned about the budget crisis that affects the state and the people who this budget is going to hurt the most. And one of the issues that we will have to deal with in Albany is the whole issue of public assistance, welfare, all the words that make people uncomfortable, but now has come out very strongly about some of these issues. And I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about the welfare cuts and some of the other cuts in the budget that could really harm a lot of people, innocent people.
Certainly. Well, as you know, now New York State has come out in opposition to Governor Pataki's proposed cuts, I should say draconian cuts in welfare and Medicaid. And we came out in opposition last year. We made certain predictions last year. They're coming true this year, and I have some more predictions for next year.
Give me a prediction from last year to this year.
Prediction from last year to this year was, as I went around the state talking about the components of the Republican contract and the components of the Governor Pataki's proposed cuts with welfare and Medicaid, look at your taxes back in January of '95, and you'll find in 12, 24, 36, and 48 months your property and school taxes will slowly inch up by the hundreds. Okay? And I know in my particular case, my school tax has already gone up $400, and I myself didn't expect that to happen. The theme of what I want to convey today is that when you cut major entitlements, we're paying for that in other ways down the road. So if you save a few dollars, and we'll talk about the tax cuts that have come down, you're paying in larger sums through other types of services. As I'm sure you're aware, there's 14 million people in this country on the AFDC program, the Aid to Families with Dependent Children. 9.5 million are children. Most people don't realize that. And in New York State, a high percentage, as across the country, 91.2% of the AFD single-headed households are women with an average of 2 children. A lot of propaganda has been thrown out there the last year and a half that there are a lot of deadbeats on welfare. The majority are women and children, and the fraud is really at a minor percentage of the whole group.
In fact, test cases having to do with finger imaging really showed in, I forget the county in upstate New York, but the fraud was basically what fraud is in everything. You know, there was no great glare there.
And we also predicted that the state was going to spend millions of dollars on a finger printing or finger imaging program, which should have used monies to be diverted towards other worthwhile programs in the entitlement area. But getting back to the draconian cuts that have been proposed, the concern that we have is that we are opposed to any type of time limits, and we're imposed for penalties on additional children. We have to keep in mind that the welfare and Medicaid budgets in the state are not the main sources of money that come out of our budget, and that women and children have been targeted for some reason for which we're not quite sure. we would urge the governor, we would urge the members of the legislature that instead of targeting women and children, that they develop business incentives for creation of jobs. When we talk about throwing women off of welfare, we have to think of what will be their alternatives. Are there enough jobs out there? Well, there are studies to show there are not enough jobs. And is there enough job training? We have to work harder to develop job training programs.
Isn't this sort of backwards? Wouldn't it be prudent if you said, for the next 5 years, we're going to do comprehensive job training, we're going to do comprehensive daycare providing, we're going to analyze the effects of this on children, we're going to come up with the program that the state has the power to do something that's exciting, that would help the poorest people in the state. And once that is implemented, makes more sense on the back end and say, okay, now we're going to talk about the second part of reform, which is public responsibility. It just seems that the whole thing has been backwards.
Well, you know, you're raising an important issue. If we look at the state of New York and the social service program as a big business, if there was a CEO whose money was dependent upon its success, he or she would not just throw the workers or the people receiving the benefits out on the street. He or she would do exactly what you're saying, which is to establish job training, develop business incentives so that jobs can be created, create child care, transportation, and of course preserve health care for these workers. And then therefore you're going to create taxpayers. Unfortunately, there hasn't been enough attention directed in that area. What we have seen, and this is to our concern also, is that the governor and other legislators have pushed for tax cuts. And we'd like to commend you and Senator Leichter, by the way, for the fact that you've sponsored legislation to initiate the rollback of these tax cuts. It was a very brave thing to do because it takes courage up here in this political arena, number one. Number two, it recognizes the fact that the average family out there is not going to get that much of a tax cut. You're talking about maybe $100, $200, $300. But by cutting taxes, we're also cutting monies going to other services. And let me give you a good example of that. If we cut Medicaid, hospitals in this state, and Medicaid is the health insurance program for the poor, if we cut Medicaid, hospitals around the state will receive less money. And in order for those hospitals to operate, they need the money to bring on nursing staff, doctors that are competent, and equipment. You and I, who are not on Medicaid, will suffer. There will be less nurses taking care of members of our family when we're in the hospital, when members of our family have a terminal illness. There will be less nurses there to tend to us.
And because millions of people aren't insured and millions of children don't have insurance, at the hospital emergency room in my district at Roosevelt, St. Luke's, and St. Clair's, that becomes the primary care facility for the poorest people, jamming the emergency rooms, putting a tremendous burden of cost on the doctors and the hospital itself, bringing these hospitals to the point of insolvency and possible closure, which I don't understand.
No, we don't understand it either. You know, and the only way to compare this type of action is kind of like maxing out all your charge cards and then deciding, I'm going to get another charge card and go on vacation. I mean, that is what the governor is proposing.
I must tell you, the Leichter-Stringer bill, we picked up 2 more sponsors of the bill. We're now at 44 members. I think we may hit half the Democratic conference in the next couple of weeks. It just seems that now others are starting to recognize, as we get closer to deciding how we're going to balance the budget, that none of the legislative leaders can really step forward and say, we are going to do these cuts. I think everybody is looking for an alternative, and the only alternative we have right now is to deal openly, honestly, and courageously about the tax cuts, especially for corporations and for really people who make millions of dollars, that if we were able to adopt a part of this bill or this bill in total, we would really stave off the devastating cuts to middle-income people and poor people.
Certainly. And, you know, when you look at the type of money that we're throwing out and throwing back, it's $1.8 billion, and that happens to be the exact amount of money we're short in New York State. So this was perfectly avoidable. And, you know, we urge politicians and the elected officials that are watching this show tonight to think, instead of only what the results will be in November and what they think that the voters out there want to hear, we're trying to convey that the voters want to hear some responsible action on behalf of their elected officials. You just touched on another issue which I'd just like to also raise, and that is the issue of corporate welfare. So much propaganda has been going on in the past year and a half about the welfare mother and her 2 children. But let me just say that Each year, New York State taxpayers pay $1.2 billion that goes to CEOs and managers to pay for their businesses and for higher salaries. And yet, the state of New York, through Governor Pataki and everyone else, they don't require that these businesses and corporations show proof that they have actually hired and created more jobs, hired more people.
No accountability. In fact, if you look at corporate profits for the top 10% of the corporation, record numbers. In fact, some could argue the economy is doing well in other parts of the country and even in the Northeast, except when you get down to New York State, where we have not yet brought in the corporations to sort of share the wealth a little bit to make sure that the middle income folks have permanent jobs, and that they're not being caught in the downsizing. It's the 90s word, the downsizing, it's really firing. And we haven't dealt with those issues in the state.
You're raising also yet another issue, the word downsizing. You know, we've become very cute in the 90s.
Right.
Instead of using the word fire, which means someone's without a job, we say they've been downsized.
Right. Exactly. In fact, I learned the difference when I was at a town hall meeting in my district explaining the Like to Stringer bill and talking about the budget. A senior citizen said to me, Scott, stop using the word downsizing. That's a 90s word. This is out and out firing. And I learned, and you're right, we don't use downsizing anymore because it's not true.
Absolutely.
It's firing. In the time that we have left, you and I have worked for many years together, and I think that your work has really been extraordinary. You've also taught me a lot about issues having to do with domestic violence and the fact that the legislature can make a difference, because we tend to be tough on crime in every area except when it comes to people abusing women, whether it's your lover, your spouse, your date. And maybe you can shed some light on, we've worked a lot on some issues.
Certainly. We'd like to commend you and thank you for all your hard work on the stalking issue. That's been something you're aware we've worked on for 4 years. And you have a very tough stalking bill out there right now, which we've supported for the past few years. And there are efforts underway in the Assembly to promote a stalking piece of legislation. One of the things that we've been confronted with within our own organization is the fact that sometimes there's a perpetrator out there who will stalk somebody and not use a knife or a weapon. And you've developed legislation to close that loophole so that a stalker who is following somebody and putting someone in fear of their physical safety could seek the courts and seek certain types of statutes to get redress and to get this person put in jail if necessary. So your efforts in the stalking area have been admirable, and we look forward to continue to working with you on that.
I want to very much. I think that the role that now is played in the legislature, really because of you, has brought a certain awareness to the leadership and to the governor on these issues. And hopefully, I think in the next couple of years, we're going to be able to see some real tough laws. And also in the budget, when you talk about rape crisis intervention and budget items that will go to fund prevention and education, which is really a way of keeping families together also. I don't think you're a born abuser. I think it's a learned function, and we have to address those issues too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we look forward to working with you on more domestic violence legislation. Certainly, it's taken years to get the attention of both houses. We've always had a good rapport with the offices in the Assembly, and the Senate has worked hard with us on these issues in the last couple of years, and we look forward to promoting that in the future.
Maybe we'll get you to run for office and clean up the mess around here. That was my. We've been with Lois Canter Shapiro from Now, a very interesting discussion of issues that affect this state and really affect people who don't really have the kind of representation they need. For those of you who need to reach me, you know where my district office is by now. It's at 230 West 72nd Street. The phone number is 873-6368. If you'd like to get in touch with Now and you didn't catch the phone number, it's here now. The National Organization for Women, 518-893-0346. Excellent organization fighting in the state capitol for issues that I know everyone in my district and around the city cares passionately about. So join us next week with another important guest. My name is Scott Stringer. Thanks for tuning in this evening.